The massive station floated in the void between stars, its metal halls filled with creatures from 1,000 different worlds. Ambassador Zix 441 walked through the corridors on 4 legs, his purple skin gleaming under the artificial lights. The Calarian had served the Galactic Council for over 2 centuries, and today he would meet the newest species to join their ranks. Another primitive race from the Outer Rim? He thought to himself, reviewing the data tablet in his clawed hands. The species called themselves humans, and they came from a small blue planet they named Earth. The initial reports made them sound almost laughably weak compared to the great powers of the galaxy. Commander Jake Morrison stood in the docking bay of the human ship, checking his uniform one last time. He was tall for a human, with brown hair and calm blue eyes. Behind him, his crew prepared for the most important meeting in human history. They had traveled for months to reach this place, and now they would finally meet the galactic community that had ruled the stars for millions of years. Remember, Jake told his team, we represent all of humanity today. Let's show them what we're made of. Dr. Lisa Carter nodded, adjusting her thick glasses. She was the team's expert on alien life, though she had never actually seen a living alien before today. Her hands shook slightly as she picked up her translation device. At 35, she had spent her entire career preparing for this moment. The airlock opened with a soft hiss, and the humans stepped into the station. The artificial gravity felt strange under their feet, slightly lighter than Earth normal. The air smelled of ozone and something else they couldn't identify. Strange sounds echoed through the metal halls as various alien species went about their daily business. ZYX-441 waited for them in the main conference room. When the humans entered, he studied them with interest. They were smaller than he had expected, with soft pink skin and strange hair growing from their heads. They moved carefully, looking around at everything with wide eyes. "Welcome to Station Omega 7, ZYX-441 said through his translator. His voice came out as a series of clicks and whistles, but the device changed it into words the humans could understand. "I am Ambassador Zix-441 of the Calarian hegemony. We have been waiting to meet your species." Jake stepped forward and extended his hand. "Commander Jake Morrison, representing the United Earth Government. We're honored to be here." ZYX-441 looked at the extended hand with confusion. Several other alien observers in the room made sounds that might have been laughter. After a moment, the Calarian reached out with one of his clawed appendages and briefly touched the human's hand. "An interesting greeting ritual," ZYX-441 noted, making a mental note to add this to his report. "Please sit. We have much to discuss." The humans took their seats around the large table. Dr. Carter pulled out a small device and began recording everything. She noticed that the aliens were watching their every move with what seemed like amusement. "Your species has developed faster than light travel," Zix-441 began, "which is impressive for such a young civilization. However, our initial scans show that your technology is quite primitive compared to galactic standards." Jake nodded. "We're eager to learn and to contribute what we can to the galactic community." "Contribute?" asked Vorth 9, an insect-like creature from the Hive Collective. "What could your species possibly offer us?" Dr. Carter spoke up. "We have unique perspectives on biology, chemistry, and physics. Our scientists have made several discoveries that might interest you." The aliens exchanged glances. Zix-441 made another note on his tablet. "These humans seem to think their primitive science might actually be useful." It was almost endearing, like watching children play with toys. "Tell us about your military capabilities," said General Krextor, a massive being covered in natural armor. "How do you handle conflicts on your world?" Jake chose his words carefully. "We've had our share of wars throughout history, but we've learned to resolve most disputes through negotiation and compromise. Our military exists mainly for defense." "Defense?" Krextor's translator made a sound like grinding metal. "Against what enemies?" "Well, we've only recently discovered that. We're not alone in the universe," Jake explained. "Most of our conflicts were with other human nations. We've been working toward global peace. The aliens looked at each other again. A species that fought among itself and then tried to make peace? How inefficient. Most galactic species had unified under strong leaders who crushed all opposition. Dr. Carter noticed their reactions and tried to explain. We value individual freedom and democracy. We believe every person should have a voice in how they're governed. Every person? Zix 441 asked. Even the weak ones? Even those who contribute nothing? Everyone, Lisa confirmed. We believe all. Humans have worth. The aliens were quiet for a moment. This was even stranger than they had expected. Most civilized species had long ago eliminated their weak members to improve their genetic stock. These humans seemed to actively protect their weakest individuals. What about your expansion into space? Asked Vorth 9. Surely you claim new worlds for your strongest and most capable? Jake shook his head. We establish colonies through volunteer programs. Families can choose to move to new worlds if they want to. We don't force anyone? And if the world is dangerous? Krextor asked. We do everything we can to make it safe first, Jake replied. We evacuate people if necessary. No colony is worth human lives. The aliens were astounded. These humans actually valued individual lives over territorial expansion. They put their own people before strategic advantage. It was the most backwards thinking any of them had ever encountered. Zix 441 decided to test their weakness further. What if another species claimed one of your worlds? What would you do? Jake was quiet. For a moment, we would try to negotiate. Find a solution that works for everyone, and if negotiation failed, we would defend our people, but we'd try to minimize casualties on both sides. The aliens could barely contain their amusement. These humans would actually hold back in a fight to avoid hurting their enemies. They were even weaker than the initial reports had suggested. The meeting continued for several hours. The humans answered every question honestly, not realizing that each answer made them seem more helpless to their alien hosts. They talked about their art, their music, their literature. They spoke about caring for their elderly and protecting their children. They mentioned their pets with obvious affection. When the meeting ended, Zix 441 walked the humans back to their ship. Thank you for coming, he said. We will consider your application to join the Galactic Council. After the humans left, the aliens gathered to discuss what they had learned. The consensus was clear. Humanity was a weak but potentially useful species. They could be given simple tasks and dangerous jobs that other species wouldn't want. Their emotional nature made them easy to manipulate, and their moral constraints made them unlikely to become a threat. Zix 441 began writing his report, classifying humans as a minor species suitable for basic membership. He had no idea that he was making the biggest mistake in galactic history. Intelligence Officer Kethmore sat in his observation post above the human colony of New Haven, watching the daily activities below with growing confusion. The purple-skinned Calarian had been assigned to study human behavior for the past 2 years, and every report he filed made the species seem stranger and more inefficient through his powerful telescopes. He watched as Captain Ryan Brooks walked through the settlement, stopping to talk with different groups of colonists. The human leader spent hours each day just listening to complaints and suggestions from his people. Any sensible species would have established a strict hierarchy with unquestioning obedience, but these humans seemed to debate everything. Computer, add to behavioral log. Kethmore spoke into his recording device. Subject species continues to waste enormous amounts of time on what they call democratic processes. Leader Brooks held another public meeting today that lasted 3 hours. Nothing was accomplished except more talking. Down in the colony, Captain Brooks finished his morning rounds and headed to the agricultural sector. At 42, he was an experienced leader who had helped establish 12 human colonies across 3 different star systems. His weathered face showed the strain of constant responsibility, but his eyes remained kind and patient. How are the crops coming along, Pete? He asked one of the farmers. Pete Martinez wiped sweat from his forehead. and gestured toward the growing fields. Better than expected, Captain. The soil here is rich and the climate is perfect. We should have enough food for the winter months. Good to hear. Any problems I should know about? Well, there's been some arguments about work schedules. Some folks want to work longer hours to get more done, but others say we need to maintain work-life balance. You know how it is? Brooks nodded. Schedule a town meeting for tomorrow evening. We'll figure out something that works for everyone. From his observation post, Kethmore watched this interaction with amazement. The human leader actually cared about his people's happiness and comfort. Most galactic species would simply assign work quotas and punish anyone who failed to meet them. These humans seemed more concerned with feelings than efficiency. Dr. Kelly Hayes worked in the colony's research lab, trying to understand the local ecosystem. At 38, she was one of Earth's top xenobiologists, but she had volunteered for this assignment because she loved the challenge of studying new life forms. She spent her days cataloging plants and animals, always careful not to disturb the natural balance. We need to be careful with our expansion, she told Brooks during their weekly meeting. There's a species of bird-like creatures that nest in the trees near the north sector. If we clear that area for housing, we might destroy their breeding grounds. What do you suggest? Brooks asked. We could build around them, or maybe delay construction until after their mating season. It would only set us back a few months. Kethmore recorded this conversation with disbelief. The humans were actually changing their plans to protect some useless animals that served no purpose. Any rational species would have eliminated the creatures immediately and continued with their expansion. The alien observer had similar reactions to almost every human activity he witnessed. The colonists spent time and resources on art, music, and entertainment. They built recreational facilities and parks. They established schools for their children that focused on creativity and critical thinking rather than just obedience and job skills. Most shocking of all, they actually took care of their sick and elderly. Kethmore watched as the colony's medical staff spent precious resources keeping alive humans who could no longer contribute to society. Dr. Sarah Kim, the colony's chief medical officer, worked tirelessly to treat everyone who came to her clinic, regardless of their ability to pay or their value to the community. It doesn't make sense, Kethmore muttered to himself. They're wasting resources on individuals who will never be productive again. He watched as Dr. Kim spent an entire afternoon treating an elderly colonist named Frank, who had broken his leg. The man was 75 years old and contributed nothing to the colony's work output. Any logical species would have simply eliminated him and used his resources for someone more useful, but the humans didn't stop there. They actually seemed to value Frank's opinions and stories. Young colonists would sit with him in the evenings, listening to his tales about life on Earth. They treated him with respect and kindness, as if his mere existence had value. The alien intelligence officer filed report after report describing human weaknesses. They were too emotional, too soft, too concerned with individual welfare to ever become a major galactic power. Their military training was particularly laughable. Colonel Amy Foster ran the colony's defense force, but her methods seemed designed to minimize violence rather than maximize killing efficiency. She trained her troops in something called rules of engagement that actually restricted when and how they could use their weapons. They practiced crowd control and peacekeeping more than actual combat. Remember, Foster told her soldiers during training, our job is to protect the colony, not to start fights. Always try to de-escalate situations before using force. And if we do have to fight, we follow the Geneva Conventions and the Colonial Defense Code. Kethmore watched these training sessions with growing amusement. The humans actually had rules that limited how they could fight. They were forbidden from targeting civilians, from using certain weapons, and from pursuing defeated enemies. They even had medical personnel whose job was to heal enemy wounded after battles. The intelligence officer sent regular reports to his superiors on the Calarian homeworld. Each message reinforced the same conclusion: humans were weak, emotional, and bound by moral constraints that would make them easy to defeat if conflict ever arose. But Kethmore missed important details in his observations. He didn't notice the casual strength with which human workers lifted heavy equipment that would require mechanical aids for most other species. He didn't understand that their inefficient democratic processes actually created incredibly loyal and motivated populations. He didn't realize that their concern for individual welfare made them willing to fight with desperate fury when their people were threatened. The alien observer saw Dr. Hayes carefully studying local predators, but he didn't understand that she was learning how to kill them efficiently if necessary. He watched Colonel Foster's soft training methods, but he didn't notice how quickly her soldiers could shift from crowd control to lethal force when the situation demanded it. Most importantly, Kethmore didn't understand that everything he was witnessing was humans at peace. He had never seen them at war, never watched them when their moral constraints were removed and their protective instincts were fully activated. He was studying humanity's greatest strength and interpreting it as weakness. The Calarian filed his final assessment after 3 years of observation. Species classification, useful but harmless. Recommend integration into galactic community as a minor member race. Suitable for dangerous mining operations and frontier colonization? Minimal. Military threat. Emotional instability and moral constraints prevent effective combat operations. The report was distributed throughout the Galactic Intelligence Network, where it was read with satisfaction by the major powers. Another weak species had been cataloged and understood. The humans would make good servants and workers, but they would never challenge the established order. None of them realized they were making the biggest mistake in galactic history. War Chief Thrascole of the Zephyrian Empire studied the star charts with satisfaction. The blue markers showed human settlements scattered across 12 star systems, ripe for the taking. His red eyes gleamed as he planned the coming invasion. The Zephyrians had been expanding their territory for centuries, and these soft humans would barely slow them down. The intelligence reports confirm our expectations, he told his assembled fleet commanders. The humans are weak, emotional, and bound by foolish moral codes. They will surrender quickly once they realize they cannot win. Admiral Greg Patterson stood on the bridge of the UES Defiant, watching the enemy fleet approach through the viewscreen. At 51, he was one of Earth's most experienced military officers, but he had never faced an alien invasion before. His weathered hands gripped the command rail as he studied the tactical displays. Sir, we're detecting 67 Zephyrian warships entering the Kepler system, reported Lieutenant Commander Janet Mills, his tactical officer. They're moving toward the colony on Kepler 442b. How many civilians on that world? Patterson asked. Approximately 15,000, sir. The evacuation transports are already en route, but they'll need at least 18 hours to get everyone off-world. Patterson nodded grimly. Signal the fleet. We're going to buy them that time. The Zephyrian commander, General Vexstar, watched the approaching human ships with amusement. Only 12 vessels against his mighty fleet. The humans were either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. He suspected it was the latter. They're not even trying to run, he observed to his bridge crew. Perhaps they don't understand the situation. What General Vexstar didn't understand was that Admiral Patterson was following standard human military doctrine. The evacuation of civilians always took priority over tactical advantage. The human fleet would fight and die if necessary to give those families time to escape. The first battle began at the edge of the Kepler system. The human ships moved in formations that confused the Zephyrians. Instead of concentrating their firepower on the enemy fleet, they spread out to cover multiple escape routes. Their tactics seemed designed to delay rather than destroy. They're fighting like they're trying to lose, General Vexstar told his staff. They keep pulling back just when they should press their advantage. Commander Sandra Wells watched the space battle from the surface of Kepler 442b. She was responsible for the ground defenses, and she had spent the last 6 months preparing for this moment. Her fortifications were elaborate and deep, designed to protect the civilian population, while the evacuation continued. Ma'am, the enemy is landing troops in Sector 7, reported Sergeant Tim Rodriguez. Looks like about 2,000 soldiers. Roger that. Activate the defensive grid and fall back to position 2. Remember, our job is to buy time, not to win glory. The Zephyrian ground forces advanced confidently toward the human positions. Their intelligence reports had described human military doctrine as weak and inefficient. They expected quick victory against an enemy that was too concerned with avoiding casualties to fight effectively. What they found instead was a maze of interconnected bunkers and defensive positions that seemed to go on forever. The humans had spent months digging tunnels and preparing fallback positions. Every time the Zephyrians thought they had broken through, they found another layer of defenses waiting for them. "These humans fight like cowards," complained Captain Drixmore as his unit took cover from human sniper fire. "They won't stand and fight like warriors. They just keep running and hiding." But the Zephyrians were learning that human cowardice was actually very effective. The defenders used hit-and-run tactics, striking quickly and then disappearing into their tunnel networks. They set traps and ambush that picked off alien soldiers one by one. Commander Wells moved through the underground command center, coordinating the defense. Her forces were outnumbered 10-1, but they were fighting on their home ground and they knew every tunnel and hiding spot. "How much longer do we need to hold?" she asked her communications officer. "Evacuation is 60% complete, ma'am." "At least 8 more hours," Wells nodded. 8 hours against overwhelming odds. Her troops were already exhausted, but they would keep fighting. That was what humans did when their families were threatened. Above the planet, Admiral Patterson was fighting his own desperate battle. His fleet had been reduced to 7 ships, but they were still managing to disrupt the Zephyrian advance. The human vessels used every trick in the book, from electronic warfare to ramming attacks. "Sir, the Zephyrians are demanding our surrender," reported Lieutenant Commander Mills. "They're offering to spare the colony if we stand down." Patterson almost laughed. The aliens still didn't understand. "Signal all ships. Continue the mission. Protect the evacuation at all costs." The Zephyrian war chief was beginning to feel frustrated. This was supposed to be a simple conquest, but the humans were proving annoyingly difficult to defeat. Their ships fought with desperate courage, and their ground forces refused to break no matter how many casualties they took. "They're not fighting to win," he realized. "They're fighting to protect their civilians. Every move they make is about buying time for the evacuation." This revelation should have made him respect the humans, but instead it made him angry. How dare these inferior beings defy the mighty Zephyrian Empire? He ordered his forces to stop holding back and to crush the human resistance completely. The battle intensified as the Zephyrians brought their full strength to bear. Human positions were overrun one by one, and Admiral Patterson watched helplessly as his remaining ships were destroyed. But still the humans fought on, selling their lives for precious minutes. Commander Wells found herself trapped in a collapsed bunker with only 3 of her soldiers left alive. The Zephyrians were closing in, and she could hear their alien voices getting closer. She checked her watch. 7 hours and 43 minutes. The evacuation was almost complete. "Ma'am, we could surrender," suggested Sergeant Rodriguez. "The aliens might show mercy." Wells shook her head. "Our families are still up there. We hold this position until the last transport is away." The final 17 minutes felt like hours. Wells and her remaining soldiers fought with everything they had, knowing that each second they delayed the enemy was another second for the evacuation ships to reach safety. When the alien soldiers finally broke through, they found only empty rooms and silent corridors. The last human transport ship lifted off just as the Zephyrian forces reached the spaceport. War Chief Thrascole watched it disappear into hyperspace with mixed feelings. He had won the battle and claimed the planet, but somehow it felt like a defeat. 15,000 civilians evacuated successfully, his intelligence officer reported. Human military casualties, approximately 4,000. Our casualties, approximately 12,000. The war chief stared at the numbers in disbelief. The humans had been outnumbered 5-1, but they had inflicted 3 times as many casualties as they had suffered. and they had achieved their primary objective of saving their civilians. How is this possible? He demanded. Our intelligence said they were weak and inefficient. His advisors had no answers. The humans had fought exactly as the reports described. They had avoided direct confrontation, they had retreated when pressed, and they had prioritized civilian safety over military victory. But somehow, these supposed weaknesses had made them incredibly effective opponents. The Zephyrian Empire updated their files on humanity, noting that the species was more resilient than expected. But they still classified them as a minor threat. Assuming that human tactics would be less effective in a larger conflict, they had no idea that they had just witnessed humanity fighting with massive restraint, following rules of engagement that limited their responses even while facing extinction. The humans had been playing defense, protecting their people while trying to minimize casualties on both sides. The aliens had won a single battle, but they had learned nothing about what humans could do when they stopped holding back. Supreme Overlord Krathvex of the Void Collective floated in his command chamber, studying the reports from the Zephyrian conflict with great interest. The 8-foot-tall creature had skin like black metal and eyes that glowed with inner fire. His species had conquered dozens of worlds, and he believed humans would be no different. The Zephyrians barely defeated one small human fleet, he told his war council. They claim the humans are dangerous, but I see only weakness. A truly strong species would have won that battle decisively, his military advisors agreed. The Void Collective had crushed civilizations far more advanced than humanity. These emotional creatures with their moral limitations would crumble under a full assault. General Paul Anderson sat in the underground command center on Earth, surrounded by holographic displays showing human colonies under attack across 17 star systems. At 48, he was the youngest general in Earth Defense Force history, but the weight of humanity's survival rested on his shoulders. Sir, the Void Collective has launched simultaneous attacks on 7 different colonies, reported Colonel Janet Price, his chief of staff. They're using the same tactics the Zephyrians used, but with 10 times the numbers. Anderson studied the tactical displays with growing concern. The enemy had learned from the Zephyrian mistakes. They were hitting multiple targets at once, spreading human forces thin, but they were still making the same fundamental error in judgment. They think we're weak because we protect our civilians, he said quietly. They don't understand that protecting our people is what makes us strong. Dr. Rachel Stone worked in the strategy division, analyzing enemy patterns and developing countermeasures. The 35-year-old woman had spent years studying alien military doctrine, but she was seeing things that didn't match the intelligence reports. General, there's something strange about these attacks, she reported during the morning briefing. The Void Collective is holding back their most powerful weapons. They're fighting like they expect us to surrender after the first few battles. Anderson nodded grimly. They're testing us. They want to see how much pressure we can take before we break. What the aliens didn't understand was that humans had been preparing for this moment since the first contact with the Galactic Council. Every colony had deep bunkers and extensive tunnel networks. Every civilian had been trained in emergency procedures. Every military unit had practiced fighting against overwhelming odds. Lieutenant Colonel Amy Foster commanded the defense of New Harmony, a colony world with 2 million inhabitants. The Void Collective had sent a massive fleet to crush this target, expecting quick victory. Instead, they found a population that simply refused to break. Ma'am, enemy forces are landing in all 12 sectors, reported Major Steve Collins. They're using drop pods and orbital bombardment. Civilian casualties are mounting. Foster felt the familiar anger rising in her chest, but she pushed it down. Human military doctrine was clear. Protect the innocent, minimize casualties, follow the rules of engagement. Even when facing extinction, humans maintained their moral standards. Begin Phase 2 evacuation, she ordered. Move all civilians to the deep shelters. All military units implement defensive pattern Delta. Remember, we're buying time for the evacuation transports. The Void Collective Ground Commander, General Morkskul, watched the human response with confusion. His forces had landed expecting to face a broken and demoralized enemy. Instead, they found organized resistance that seemed to anticipate their every move. "These humans fight like they've been planning for this attack for years," he reported to his superiors. "Their defenses are deeper and more sophisticated than our intelligence suggested." The truth was that humans had been planning for exactly this scenario. Every colony had detailed defense plans. Every citizen knew their role in the evacuation procedures. Every soldier had trained for the day when humanity would face a threat that wanted to destroy everything they held dear, but the aliens still didn't understand what they were really facing. They saw the human restraint and assumed it was weakness. They watched human forces pull back to protect civilians and thought they were witnessing cowardice. Colonel Mike Johnson led the space defense around the industrial world of Titan Prime. His small fleet of 30 ships faced over 200 Void Collective vessels, but he had advantages the aliens didn't recognize. "Sir, enemy fleet is entering weapons range," reported Commander Lisa Hayes from the tactical station. "They're maintaining formation and advancing at steady speed. They seem to expect us to run." Johnson almost smiled. The aliens had studied human tactics from the Zephyrian conflict, but they had learned the wrong lessons. They thought human defensive strategies were signs of weakness, when they were actually signs of incredible discipline and planning. "All ships implement Operation Fortress," he ordered. "Show them what human engineering can do." The Void Collective fleet advanced confidently toward the human positions. Their sensors showed only 30 small vessels against their massive armada. Victory seemed certain. Then the asteroid field around Titan Prime came alive. Hidden weapons platforms emerged from concealed positions. Massive railguns that had been disguised as mining equipment opened fire. The entire asteroid belt had been turned into a fortress that could defend itself. "What is this?" demanded Fleet Admiral Threx Moore as his ships came under fire from dozens of hidden positions. "Our intelligence said the humans only had 30 ships." The truth was that humans had been preparing for this war since first contact. They had built defenses that looked like civilian installations. They had hidden weapons that appeared to be mining equipment. They had turned entire star systems into fortresses while maintaining the appearance of peaceful colonies. Colonel Johnson's fleet used the chaos to strike at the enemy's weak points. Human ships moved through the asteroid field with practiced ease, striking hard and then disappearing into the maze of hidden positions. The battle raged for 18 hours. The Void Collective had overwhelming numbers, but they were fighting in a carefully prepared killing field. Human forces used every advantage of terrain and preparation, while the aliens struggled to adapt to unexpected resistance. Dr. Stone watched the battle reports with growing understanding. "General, do you see what's happening? The aliens are fighting like they expect us to follow their rules. They think war is about brute force and intimidation." Anderson nodded. "They don't understand that we've been preparing for this our entire history. Every human conflict has taught us how to fight smarter, not just harder." The Void Collective finally broke through the Titan Prime defenses after losing over half their fleet. They claimed victory, but it felt hollow. The humans had evacuated most of their civilians and inflicted devastating casualties on the attackers. Supreme Overlord Krathvex studied the battle reports with growing frustration. His forces were winning, but the costs were enormous. Every human colony fought with desperate courage. Every human soldier seemed willing to die rather than surrender. "Perhaps we underestimated them," admitted his chief advisor. "Their defensive capabilities are more sophisticated than we realized." "No," Krathvex said firmly. "They're just more stubborn than expected. Once we break their spirit, they'll surrender like all the others." The Void Collective decided to end the war quickly by attacking Earth itself. They assembled the largest fleet in their history and prepared to strike at the heart of human civilization. They believed that once the human homeworld fell, the scattered colonies would surrender without further resistance. They had no idea that they were about to face humanity at its most dangerous. The humans had been fighting defensively, following rules of engagement that limited their responses. But when Earth itself was threatened, those restraints would begin to disappear. The aliens were about to learn the difference between humans, who were trying to minimize casualties, and humans who were fighting for their very survival. They were about to discover that everything they had faced so far was just humanity holding back. The real war was about to begin. The massive Void collective fleet hung in space beyond Pluto's orbit. Over 3,000 warships preparing for the final assault on Earth. Supreme Overlord Krathvex stood in his command chamber, watching the blue planet through the viewscreen. After months of costly victories, he would finally crush the human spirit by destroying their homeworld. "Begin the final attack," he ordered his fleet commanders. "Show no mercy. These humans must learn that resistance is futile." Captain Derek Murphy stood on the command deck of Luna Base, watching the enemy fleet approach through the tactical displays. The 39-year-old officer had spent his entire career preparing for this moment, but he had never imagined it would come so soon. Behind him, his staff worked quietly at their stations, their faces grim but determined. "Sir, we're receiving priority communications from Earth Command," reported Lieutenant Sarah Kim. "Admiral Johnson is requesting final confirmation of your orders." Murphy picked up the secure communicator and spoke clearly. "This is Luna Base Actual. Confirm authorization code 7-7-Alpha-9. The gloves are off." Repeat, the gloves are off. Across the solar system, similar messages were being sent to every human military unit. The words were simple, but they carried enormous weight. For the first time in human history, their military forces were being given permission to fight without restraint. Dr. Susan Clark sat in the communications center deep beneath the Pentagon, monitoring alien transmissions with growing alarm. The 42-year-old linguist had spent years studying enemy communications, but something had changed in the past few hours. "General Anderson, you need to hear this," she called out, her voice tight with concern. "The enemy communications are changing? They're starting to sound ... worried." Anderson walked over to her station. "What kind of worried?" "Listen to this transmission from one of their scout ships," Clark said, playing back the recording. Even through the translation, the alien voice sounded nervous. "Forward scouts report unusual energy readings from human positions. Recommend caution in approach." Anderson nodded grimly. The aliens were finally starting to notice that something was different. Human defensive positions that had been carefully restrained for months were now powering up weapon systems that had been kept hidden. Admiral Kevin Johnson commanded the main Earth defense fleet from his flagship, the UES Vengeance. At 55, he was the most experienced combat commander in human history, but he had never fought a battle like this one. For the first time, he was authorized to use every weapon in the human arsenal. "Sir, all defensive platforms are online," reported Commander Lisa Hayes. "The lunar mass drivers are charged and ready. The asteroid belt installations are armed and tracking targets." Johnson studied the tactical display with satisfaction. The aliens thought they were facing the same defensive strategy that had been used throughout the war. They had no idea that humanity had been holding back their most powerful weapons. "Signal all units," he ordered. "Implement Operation Nemesis. No survivors." The Void collective fleet moved confidently toward Earth, expecting to face the familiar pattern of human resistance. Their previous battles had taught them that humans fought defensively, always trying to minimize casualties and protect civilians. They expected more of the same. Instead, they flew into a nightmare. The first surprise came from the asteroid belt. What the aliens had thought were mining installations suddenly revealed themselves as massive weapon platforms. Railguns the size of city blocks opened fire, hurling projectiles at significant fractions of the speed of light. "What is this?" demanded Fleet Admiral Threxmore as his ships came under devastating fire. "Our intelligence said the humans only had defensive capabilities." The truth was that humans had been building offensive weapons for decades, disguising them as civilian infrastructure. The entire solar system had been turned into a fortress, with hidden weapons that could destroy entire fleets, but the asteroid belt was just the beginning. As the Void Collective fleet pushed deeper into the solar system, they encountered wave after wave of previously unknown defenses. Automated fighters emerged from hidden bases on moons and planets. Cloaked ships appeared from nowhere to launch devastating attacks. Captain Murphy watched the battle from Luna Base with cold satisfaction. His lunar mass drivers were hurling tungsten rods at the enemy fleet, each projectile carrying the kinetic energy of a nuclear weapon. The aliens were learning what human engineering could accomplish when it was no longer limited by moral constraints. "Sir, enemy fleet is requesting communication," reported Lieutenant Kim. "They want to negotiate," Murphy almost laughed. "Tell them we're busy. They wanted a war, so they're getting one." The aliens had expected to face scared, desperate humans fighting for their survival. Instead, they found themselves facing a species that had been preparing for this exact scenario for generations. Every human military doctrine had been designed around the assumption that they would eventually face a superior enemy that wanted to destroy them completely. Dr. Clark continued monitoring enemy communications, and what she heard made her blood run cold. The aliens were starting to panic. Their transmissions were filled with confusion and fear as they realized they had fundamentally misunderstood their enemy. "They're calling for reinforcements," she reported to Anderson. "But listen to this, they're also sending warnings to other alien species. They're telling them that humans are not what they seem." Anderson studied the intelligence reports with growing understanding. They're finally figuring it out. They're realizing that everything they've seen so far was us holding back. The revelation was spreading through the alien fleet like wildfire. The humans who had seemed so concerned with protecting civilians were now fighting with ruthless efficiency. The species that had appeared to be bound by moral constraints was showing no mercy to an enemy that threatened their homeworld. Fleet Admiral Johnson's forces struck with precision that the aliens had never imagined possible. Human ships moved through space with deadly grace, their weapon systems operating at efficiency levels that seemed impossible. Every shot was perfectly aimed, every maneuver was precisely calculated. "How are they doing this?" Supreme Overlord Krathvex demanded as his fleet was systematically destroyed. "They're fighting like machines, but our intelligence said they were too emotional to be effective warriors." His advisors had no answers. The humans were demonstrating combat capabilities that seemed to come from nowhere. Their tactics were sophisticated, their technology was advanced, and their willingness to inflict casualties was unlimited. The truth was that humans had been designed by evolution to be persistence hunters, capable of pursuing prey across vast distances with relentless determination. When they applied this same mindset to warfare, they became something terrifying. They could fight for days without rest, adapt to any situation, and never give up no matter how hopeless things seemed. But more than that, the aliens were seeing what happened when humanity's greatest strength, their ability to choose restraint, was removed. The species that had voluntarily limited its own power was now showing what it could do when those limits were lifted. Captain Murphy received new orders from Earth Command and smiled grimly. "Signal all units. Phase 2 is authorized. Hunt them down." The surviving alien ships tried to retreat, but they found that escape was impossible. Human forces had surrounded the entire solar system. Long-range weapons that had been hidden for decades emerged from their concealment. The aliens were trapped in a carefully prepared killing field with no way out. "This is impossible," Krathvex whispered as his flagship came under attack from weapons he couldn't even see. They were supposed to be weak. They were supposed to be harmless. Dr. Clark intercepted his final transmission as the Supreme Overlord's ship was destroyed. The alien leader's last words were a warning to his species. "Tell the others. Tell them we were wrong. The humans were never weak. They were just playing with us." The battle for Earth lasted 6 hours. When it was over, the entire Void Collective invasion fleet had been destroyed. Not a single enemy ship escaped to warn their homeworld. Humanity had won its first total victory, and in doing so had revealed the truth about their nature. The aliens had spent years studying human weakness. never realizing that what they were seeing was actually humanity's greatest strength, the ability to choose mercy over destruction. Now that choice had been taken away, and the galaxy was about to learn what humans were really capable of when they stopped holding back. Ambassador Zix-441 sat alone in his private quarters aboard the Calarian research vessel, staring at the data pad in his trembling claws. The purple-skinned alien had spent the last 3 months investigating the complete destruction of the Void collective invasion fleet, and what he had discovered made his blood run cold. The emergency session of the Galactic Council had been called after desperate transmissions from the Void collective homeworld. Their entire military fleet had simply vanished near the human system called Sol. No survivors, no wreckage, no trace of what had happened to over 3,000 warships. Computer, begin final database entry. Zix-441 spoke into his recording device. His voice shook as he prepared to write the most important report in galactic history. Commander Alex Turner stood in the rebuilt conference room of Station Omega-7, the same place where humans had first met the galactic community 5 years earlier. At 38, he had become humanity's primary ambassador to the surviving alien species. His calm demeanor hid the weight of representing a species that had just revealed its true nature to the galaxy. The Galactic Council will now hear testimony regarding the recent conflict, announced the acting council president, a nervous creature from the Altarian Republic. Most of the original council members had either fled or hidden themselves after. Learning what had happened to the Void Collective. Turner activated the holographic display and began his presentation. Honored delegates, humanity wishes to clarify certain misconceptions about our species and our capabilities. In the audience, the surviving alien representatives watched with fear and fascination. These were the same humans they had dismissed as weak and emotional just months ago. Now they looked at them with the terror usually reserved for natural disasters. Colonel Jennifer Brooks, now serving as military liaison, provided the technical details of the battle. Her matter-of-fact tone made the destruction of the invasion fleet sound like a routine training exercise. The enemy fleet consisted of 3,200 vessels, she reported. Total engagement time was 5 hours and 43 minutes. Human casualties were minimal. Enemy casualties were complete. The aliens in the audience shifted uncomfortably. Complete annihilation of such a large fleet should have been impossible. Yet the evidence was undeniable. Dr. Nathan Price, the human philosopher and historian, stood to address the deeper implications of what had happened. At 45, he had spent years studying the relationship between human nature and galactic society. The fundamental error in your assessment of humanity, he began, was assuming that our restraint indicated weakness. You observed our democratic processes and concluded we were inefficient. You saw our concern for individual welfare and decided we were soft. You watched our military forces follow rules of engagement and believed we were incapable of effective warfare. ZOYX-441 continued writing his database entry, documenting every word. This was the testimony that would determine how the galaxy remembered humanity for generations to come. You were wrong about everything, Dr. Price continued. Our democracy makes us stronger because every human fights willingly. Our concern for individuals creates loyalty that your species cannot comprehend. Our rules of engagement exist because we choose to follow them, not because we must. The alien delegates listened in stunned silence. They were hearing the truth about a species they had completely misunderstood. Commander Turner took over the presentation. For the past 5 years, you have been observing humanity at peace. You studied our colonies, our military exercises, our diplomatic interactions, but you never saw us at war. You never saw what we become when our survival is threatened. The holographic display showed footage from the battle for Earth. The aliens watched in horror as human weapon systems that had been hidden for decades emerged from concealment. Mining stations revealed themselves as massive gun platforms. Civilian infrastructure transformed into military installations. Every human colony was designed to be a fortress, Turner explained. Every mining operation was also a weapons platform. Every diplomatic ship carried enough firepower to destroy a small fleet. We have been preparing for this war since the day we met you. Zix 441 paused in his writing, remembering his first meeting with the humans. He had been so amused by their primitive technology and emotional responses. Now he understood that they had been studying his species just as carefully as he had been studying theirs. Colonel Brooks provided more technical details. Human military doctrine has always assumed we would face a superior enemy. Every strategy, every weapon, every defensive position was designed around the principle that we would be outnumbered and outgunned. We have been training for exactly this scenario for our entire history. The aliens were beginning to understand the scope of their miscalculation. The humans had not just defeated the Void Collective, they had been preparing to defeat them from the moment of first contact. Dr. Price addressed the philosophical implications. You saw our kindness and assumed it was weakness. You observed our mercy and concluded we were soft. You watched us choose cooperation over conquest and decided we were harmless. You never considered that these qualities might be choices rather than limitations. The truth was devastating in its simplicity. Humanity's greatest strength was not their technology or their tactics, it was their ability to choose restraint. A species that could voluntarily limit its own power was far more dangerous than one that simply lacked power. The Void Collective discovered what happens when you threaten human children, Turner said quietly. They learned what we become when our restraint is removed. They found out what we are capable of when we stop choosing to be gentle. Zix 441 continued his database entry, documenting the full scope of the revelation. The humans had been playing with them all along. Every act of mercy had been a conscious choice. Every moment of restraint had been deliberate. They had mistaken humanity's greatest virtue for its greatest weakness. The emergency session continued. For hours, as human representatives explained their true nature to the terrified alien delegates. They spoke of human history, of their long tradition of limiting their own power through laws and moral codes. They described their military capabilities when those limits were removed. Finally, Commander Turner made humanity's position clear. We do not wish to rule the galaxy. We do not want to conquer other species. We prefer to coexist peacefully with our neighbors, but we will not tolerate threats to our people or our worlds. The choice is yours. The surviving alien species quickly agreed to new treaties that recognized human sovereignty and guaranteed peaceful coexistence. None of them wanted to face the fate of the Void Collective. CYX-441 completed his final database entry as the emergency session ended. His report would serve as both a warning and a historical record for any future species that encountered humanity. Final assessment. Humanity is not a weak species learning to be strong. They are a terrifyingly powerful species that has learned to be gentle. Their emotional attachments do not make them vulnerable, they make them incredibly dangerous when threatened. Their moral constraints are not weaknesses, they are proof of their strength. The old Calarian paused, then added the words that would become legendary throughout the galaxy. They were playing with us this whole time. Every act of mercy was a choice. Every moment of restraint was deliberate. We mistook their greatest strength, their ability to choose compassion over conquest, for weakness. Dear gods, they were just playing with us this whole time. The database entry was transmitted throughout the Galactic network, warning every species about the true nature of humanity. The age of underestimating humans was over. The galaxy would never make that mistake again. Commander Turner returned to Earth, where humanity continued its peaceful development of the solar system. They built new colonies, advanced their technology, and raised their children in safety. But now the galaxy knew the truth. Behind every human smile was a conscious choice to be kind rather than cruel. The universe had learned to respect the species that was strong enough to choose weakness and wise enough to know when that choice should end.